right. How's everyone doing today? Is like your mind's doing well with all the, ES6, TypeScript, Angular2 stuff? Are we still got room for more? Are we good? All right, cool. Well, today we're gonna do a bit of more of a hands-on approach. So you've seen a lot of Angular2 stuff, which is gonna make this talk like really easy for me. We're gonna actually look at like what can we do today to make ourselves ready for Angular2. So Angular2 is not ready, so I'm gonna be writing a lot of Angular2 today, but like don't think like, okay, time to ship to production, let's go. Like I will not support that app, so I'm sorry. So essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at how we can use component-based directives in Angular 1 and see how that's extremely similar to what we're doing in Angular 2 with components. And we're going to be doing this all with live code, and this is the only slide-like thing I have, which is a README. And all this is I'm going to click a button, it's going to create boxes, and that's all we're building. And we're going to start out by doing an Angular 1 controller-based app, and then we're going to take a look at what a component-based directive looks like in Angular 1. We're going to use observables rather than doing scope.watch to look for changes, because Angular 2 doesn't do scope watch, and we'll kind of see why. And then we'll take that Angular 1 app and we'll upgrade it to Angular 2. So let's get going, because that is a lot of code that we need to write in 25 minutes. And we're doing it all from scratch. The only things I have is like a very minimal amount of CSS and the JavaScript files I need to get running. So let's make this a little bigger. Is this good for everyone? Can people read this? All right. All right. All right, there was a couple things I heard, so I'm going to keep going until someone really screams at me. So I'm going to give this Angular 1 app, ng app of boxes. And all I've done is I've created rxjs, which we'll be using for observables in a bit. And I have Angular and my own app I'm going to create. So I'm using Angular 1.4, so nothing too crazy right now. And I'm going to start out by creating my template first, actually, because sometimes it's good to see what our template's going to look like. I'm going to create a box controller. I'm going to use controller as syntax because that's what's good for you. You should be using controller as. And we're going to create a button, and we're going to give it an ng-click because we want to be able to add boxes. So we'll say box controller.add, and we'll make that in a bit. We'll close out our button, and now we need to render out our boxes in the list. So I'll give them a class of box, and then I'll put in my ng repeat. And I can say box in box controller.boxes. And inside here, I'll just do my double curlies, and I'll say box.value. All right, so now I just need to go through and create our actual JavaScript since we have our template down. So we're going to be following a bit of the Angular style guide since John Papa is in the house, and make him happy. And so I'm going to say angular.module. And I'm going to set that to boxes, and it's going to be an empty array. And actually, like my dots over here, but that's just me. And I'm going to set up my controller. So we named it box controller, and I'm actually going to do it in a constructor function outside. And so we'll say function box controller, and inside of here, we'll create our boxes property. And we're just going to set it to a little pojo that has a value of 1. And now on the prototype of this box controller, we'll create an add function. And in here, we're not going to do anything crazy. We're just going to push onto the boxes, because we need a new one. And we're just going to set the value to this .boxes.length plus 1. So it's just going to increment them one by one. It's nothing crazy at all. So we have our template, and we have this. And our controller. So let's go over. That was me practicing, so you saw it. So now I click add, and we get boxes. It's like, cool, we just made an Angular 1 app. But there is a little bit of an issue of what we're doing. And it's very simple to understand what's going on. We have a controller, and we have a template. Like, that's cool, but as I keep creating more controllers, like we could have apps with like hundreds of controllers. And I could really cut down on that by having components rather than controllers. Because controllers model up an entire page, but we have similar elements on the page that we need across all of our pages. So if I wanted these boxes on another page, I would pretty much just copy and paste this code over to another page and hope that things go well. But instead of that, I'd actually just like my controller to go out and get data and then put it into some UI widget that knows how to do everything. And that is essentially a directive. So I actually can create a box list directive, and that will be responsible for rendering out my list of boxes. And how does it know how to do that? Well, I have to tell it something. So I say, box list, you have some boxes that you got from the box controller's boxes. And so right here, my scope is box controller. So I know I'm talking to a box controller. And I'm going to create a controller for this directive, and we're going to call it box list controller. So we know this is our scope. And so I passed in the boxes, and now I'm in for box list controller. I'm going to call an add method from this directive. And I'm also going to repeat from the boxes of the directive that I got from the controller. So now we'll go and we'll write this directive. And we'll do box list, and we'll give it some name like box list directive, so we're like super sure what we're actually making. And then inside of here, we're going to return a directive definition object. And we're going to start out with our controller as syntax, and we know that we use the box list controller as the name. So we'll use that. And now we'll do our actual directive controller, which will put an array wrapped function because we're going to be doing dependency injection. And we're going to be injecting two elements in here, two services, so a scope and $adders. And so we'll pass them into our function. And what we need to do now is we need to get the boxes. So I will have this property of boxes onto my directive, but how do I get it? Because I know I'm passing it in through here, so what do I need to do to pull it off? Well, I can call into scope, say $eval, then call in the attributes and call out boxes. And this gives me the actual array of boxes back. So now I've pulled that back from the controller, or wherever it's gotten from me. In this case, I'm getting it from the controller, but it doesn't actually matter. I just want boxes, and this is how I get boxes. And so now what I need is the add function. So we can say this dot add is a function, and we're going to bind to this, so we're still on the controller. And then now I can actually just copy and paste this from here right down into here, and now I don't need an add method anymore in my controller. So my controller is just responsible for getting data. That's all it's doing at this point. And my directive, it's the UI widget. It should know how to create more boxes, but it just needs something to be fed into it. It shouldn't be responsible for grabbing data from a server or anything like that. We just want it to render out stuff to our page. So now we'll go and refresh, and it works just like how it did before. And we see we do have the code here. So it is the other app. But there is yet another issue with this. So I do update my boxes, but how do I know I'm getting new boxes? My controller is just setting boxes. I need to get some type of notification that I'm getting another box, or my list has been updated, and I can save that out to the server or something. Well, we could use scope.watch, but that doesn't exist in Angular2. And instead, we can use observables. So this is what RxJS, we're going to include this library. And just a little quick survey. How many of you here have used observables before? So we got a couple people. So how many people here have used promises? This should pretty much be most people's hands. So before coming to Angular, like me, a lot of people probably hadn't heard of promises before. And then as soon as you started using promises, you saw that's a pretty cool way of modeling asynchronous data flow, because we're guaranteed to get that one-time callback. Well, observables are similar, except they expand upon this, is we get more than one callback. It's a continuous stream of data. And so this works well in this case, because I want to know when my boxes have been updated. So I'm going to create a service that wraps over this observable, and I'm just going to call it box service. And I'm going to start out by taking the boxes from the box controller, and I'm going to start using RxJS. So I'm going to create a property called box subject. And this is going to be a new rx.replay subject. And a replay subject is like a souped up observable, because the way observables work is that we have one thing that's broadcasting that something's happening, and another thing like subscribing to that. And the replay subject kind of just does both of those things, so it's convenient to use. And the way we actually broadcast that something's changed is we say box subject on next, and we just pass through the boxes. Because when this service gets instantiated, we'll create the boxes property, we'll create the replay subject, and since we have new boxes that nobody knows about, we're going to broadcast that out. And then when we actually add, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to say box service.prototype.add. And then inside of here, we're copying and pasting code again. So we're going to come out over here, and we're going to take the push. It's going to go up here. And then we also need to broadcast again that something has happened. So now I just want to, and I need to declare this first. So we'll say .service, and we'll give it a lowercase b box service. And then its type is the capital B box service. And now we just need to inject it. So we can inject it into the controller. And being good citizens, we'll use $inject. And so now I know it's a box service. And at this point, I can subscribe to my box subject's changes. So box subject.subscribe, we'll get a function that we pass through, and it will return to us boxes. I'm going to bind it to the instance of the controller. And then I can say this.boxes equals the boxes that are updated. So now everything changes. I'm going to get this callback. It's going to reset my boxes. And every time I get another add, it's going to get the change. It's going to come back, reset my boxes. And then now down here in add, I can also use my box service. So I will put box service in here, box service in here. And now I say box service.add. And I don't even need to bind to this anymore. So now I'll come into here, we'll refresh, and we see that we have box service, and when we click add, we get adding. And just to really point on what's happening here, we're going to put a breakpoint here where we're adding, and we're going to put a breakpoint here where we're subscribing. So now when I click add, we see that we're calling add, and then as we go next, we get the change of the new box, and the new box appears on the page. So this is cool. I've now taken something that's completely controller-based, and I've made this cool reusable component right here with this box list. And all it does is it gets data, and it knows how to do things. It knows how to add. I've set up something that knows how to subscribe to it. And my controller is super thin. It doesn't actually have a ton of responsibility. And in Angular2, this philosophy is pretty much the same way. We're building upon components. We're getting data, and we're passing components, data into the components. And components are usually made up of HTML and also other components that also take in other things. So let's start by building this in Angular2. So just like before, we'll create an index.html, and I'm going to bootstrap my Angular2 app. And you saw a lot of the TypeScript and ES6 stuff. We're going to do all this in JavaScript. So ES5, the stuff that runs in your browser today, we're going to do it all in that. And it's going to be using some of the syntax that Mishko showed you this morning. So just like before, we're including RxJS. This is Angular2, and this is our app. So it's very similar to what we did before. And what we did before here is we had a box list, and we had a controller that rendered out a box list. Well, there's no such thing as standalone controllers in Angular2. We have components which have controllers, but there's no just controllers all by themselves. And so if we want to get started with our top level component, we'll just create something. In this case, I'm arbitrarily calling it box app. So that's going to be my top level component, and it's going to hold a bunch of components below hand. So I'm just treating that as the entry point of my application. So now I'll actually create that component in my app.js. And I'm going to create a variable for it. I'm going to say var box app is angular dot. And then right here, I'm going to say a capital C component. And these things are these capital C component, this capital V view. These are annotations. And they're annotating something. And what we're actually annotating is this class. And so we're saying this capital C class is essentially a shim for ES6 classes, so we can use them in ES5. And just mimics the syntax and behavior. And we're basically saying, we're letting Angular know that this controller, the class, has a view and has a component, and it is a component. And since it's a component, it's going to have a selector of box app, which we used right here in box app. And we're also going to let it know it's a view which has a template. And we're going to give it an inline template for now, but we'll move over to a template URL in a bit. And its class, when we construct something, we can put in a constructor with an array wrap function for dependency injection. And then now inside my constructor, I can just do things like this dot message is hello. And then inside my template, I can create the template. So I can use double curlies just like how I'm used to. And I'll create an H1 that does the message. And to get it onto the page, the way we bootstrap things in Angular2 is we call Angular.bootstrap, and then we pass in our top level component, which we assign to this box app variable. And so this is just your basic hello world Angular2 component. And we just say we had it in here. So now I'm going to refresh. And we see hello. So that was pretty easy. So now we'll go and start migrating this Angular1 app over to Angular2. So to do that, we're going to start saying template URL because we want to do things in external templates. And so we're going to call this boxapp.html. And what's important to note is like inside of here, we're not putting in our template like we did in here. And the reason for that is because this is different now in Angular2 because we have Shadow DOM and Light DOM and all that stuff. And I'm not going to get into that because conveniently the talk after mine is completely that. So that worked out really well. So now we're going to create the boxapp.html. And let's take a look at what our controller, which is what our box app is now, and let's see what that was doing. What all it was doing was rendering out this box list, and we're passing in the boxes. We're not going to bring over this because this is its template, and we're going to assign that to an external template URL. So let's put in the box that box app that we have a box list. So we'll close it out, and we're passing in boxes to this from the boxes controller. In Angular1, we use controller as syntax to say where we were. And we had to do that because we're in nested scopes. I'm in a box controller here, I'm in a box list controller here, and controller as is just a really good way of knowing where you are. Well, the kind of cool thing about Angular2 is the fact that we always know where we are. We don't need to say boxlist.controller, we can just say boxes. Because this class right here, that's always our backing component. There's no nested scopes. There's not like picking out where you are on scope. It's just what your class is, that's where you are. So I have just create an empty array for now, and I know that these boxes are being passed into the box list. And when we're passing things in, we don't pass in via attributes anymore, we pass in via properties. So that's why we use this bracket syntax. And we're going to see how we can wire that up. So I know that just from this right here, I'm going to create a box list component, and I'm going to pass in my boxes to this box list. So now I can come up here, and I'll say box list, and just like before, we'll go and create our component, and we'll give it a selector of box-list. And then below it, we're actually going to do something different this time. We're going to give it this properties array, and we're going to say this box list, we pass in boxes to it as a property. So its properties are boxes. And where this comes really in handy once we get down to the class. So we'll just finish up the view. And in the view, we'll create a template URL to boxlist.html, which we'll create in just a second. And then now we'll say class. And what's cool about being able to do the properties is that inside my constructor, I don't have to say this dot boxes is whatever boxes like we did down in here in Angular1 where I had to say scope.eval from the attributes. I don't have to do that. I don't actually have to do anything because I specified it up here and Angular is going to take care of the rest. So I have my boxes because I specified this expects boxes, and that's it. So now let's go and create our box list HTML. So we'll say box-list.html. And we'll come over here to Angular1, and let's copy and paste our Angular1 code. So box list, paste it in. And with our box list, we're really only doing two things. We're attaching a click event, and we're doing an ng repeat for spitting out new boxes. And the way we do events in Angular2, as you've seen today, is we don't do ng-everything events, is that we have cool new syntax that allows us to evaluate any event. So click or key up or any custom event, a web component or iCreate, we can attach them via this syntax. And then we know that we don't have to specify a controller name. We are always backed by our class. So in a bit, we're going to inject the box service and call add from that. So I'm just going to pass that into here. And then now for ng repeat, we're going to put a star before it because it denotes that we're doing things. We're repeating through the DOM or we're showing and hiding DOM. So ng-for and ng-if use this star syntax, and like you heard before, it goes out and does tons of crazy cool stuff. But we're just going to use it for ng-for, and then we're going to say pound box. And the pound is very cool because it lets me know as the developer by looking at it that it's a local variable to this template. So it's the actual variable part of what I'm actually iterating through, of what I'm going to use down here. So I can see it and I can use it, but so can tools. So WebStorm and Visual Studio, they can use this as well, and we can get better tooling out of this. So now I'll say box of because of ES6 for of iterators. And then I know I don't need the controller, so it's just box of boxes. And then that's it. Double curly still work. So that's how I upgraded my template. And so now what we need to do is we need to bring over our observable or our box service. So we'll see what it takes to upgrade this to Angular 2. So we're going to copy this over. We're going to put it up at the top, and we're going to paste it. And now we're done upgrading this to Angular 2. Because this was just JavaScript. There was nothing that we had to do. All we have to do now is inject it as a dependency. So to do that, we're going to go down to our top level component. And we're going to let Angular know that this is available to be injected. And we're going to specify this property called app injector and pass through the box service. And now we can use this to inject into this component and all children downstream. So I only will specify this the one time up here. And now for doing dependency injection, I'll say the box service. We have a box service. And I can call this whatever I want, and it'll work with minification. So we don't do the array brackets and inject and all that stuff. It just works with this. And then if you're using TypeScript, the typing actually does the dependency injection, and that works works very well. So the next thing we need to do is we need to set up the subscription that we did in Angular 1 in our constructor. So to do that, we're just going to copy and paste this. That's it. Come back over, copy and paste. We have a subscription. And now we're going to set the box service right here and inject box service again for our box list. And we'll say this.box service is the box service. And so we can call box service.add is why we're doing that. And now we could go and try to run, but we're not going to see anything because we're missing one important piece. So in Angular 1, when we created our own directives or reused directives from Angular core, they were all registered at a global level. So if we had this global registration was fine for small, medium apps, but when we got really big apps, we were creating lots of directives and lots of stuff that all had the same name. And so they started colliding, and it actually became hard to tell what you were using. So the way that this is resolved in Angular 2, for now, is that we can actually pass through what directives and components make up our component. So in this case, we know that the box list uses ng4, and the box app uses box list. So I can go inside my Angular 2 app, I can supply this directives array, and now I say this directives array uses a box list, and it will be this box list we created up here. So it's not just some random box list, I know what it's going to be. And then right here in view, I know I'm using ng4. So I'm going to say directives, and I'm going to say angular.ng4. And this is the ng4 created by Angular. So now if I come in here and I refresh, I click add, and I have boxes. So in just about 20 minutes, we went through and we made an Angular 1 component-based app, or a controller-based app, moved it to a component-based app, and then used observables for monitoring changes. And then our path to upgrading to Angular 2 was extremely clear because we were following that same philosophy of having components. So today, if you're looking to know what can I do to get my code ready to move to Angular 2, well, start looking at your controllers. See how much of them are dependent on a template, and see what of that you can put into a directive. And just pass data into that directive, because that's all we're doing inside of Angular 1. We're inside this Angular 1 app. Saying box controller, pass it into these boxes, and then now my box list takes over the rest, and my controllers are very light. So that's my advice for upgrading Angular 2. Just look at your controllers and see what you can move into component-based directives. So if you have any questions, you can shoot any stuff on me on Twitter. I'm _David East. I guess I'm a private variable. And And I will have a repo for this. I haven't created it just yet because I actually wanted to upload the code from this session. I thought it'd be more authentic. So my once and future repo, I'm going to call it Angular2 A2 migration. There should be links out. So that's it. And you also can just come flag me in the hallway if you have any questions. Thank you guys so much.